Now, I want to talk a little bit about advocacy a little bit because I was talking to Dave Savage the other day, and he was talking about the partnership that FirstHome IQ is doing with the NBA, which I was very interested in. I've been, an active part of the NBA for a number of years. I got my CMB back in 2017, which I'm super proud of, and took a lot of work and I've talked about it here on the podcast, but I'm also part of our local, Washington Mortgage Bankers Association. I'm the treasurer of the board. I'm a past president of the board. I'm part of our Advocacy Alliance team there, and I'm really interested in what you guys are doing. So maybe if you could share what you're doing with the MBA, but more than that, what you're looking to do with loan officers and bringing advocacy, I think, to the forefront, which has been so difficult to do. I can tell you from my seat, it's been very difficult. So I'm very anxious to hear what you guys are doing on a broader scale. And let's talk a little bit about what that actually means for loan officers and our industry, really.
Yeah, well, as we headed into our third year as a nonprofit, we had, really established research and education as part of our core strategies, and we realized that advocacy needed to be a really key part of the way that we are creating impact for the future. And we see loan officers as sitting at very uniquely positioned between the consumer and the industry. And so having a voice at that table as advocates on behalf of their markets is absolutely crucial. So that's kind of where the conversation started with the Mortgage Bankers Association, was to bring loan officers to their national advocacy conference in April that is typically often attended with executives and not very well attended by loan officers. And so we have this year now over 50 loan officers who are attending, going to be on the Hill. We're bringing videographers and going to help create some content. But beyond that, as I said, this is part of a bigger strategy to partner with the MBA and also help loan officers be more engaged on a local advocacy level as well. But I am curious what brings you, like, why did you decide to get involved in advocacy, and what kind of excites you about that?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the reality is for me is I've been in executive leadership for a number of years, right? So, I'm a national, EVP of national retail sales today. But before that, I, ran a mortgage company, and I saw directly the impact that, changes that can happen, at least in my case, it was local legislation, changes, right? Like right now in Washington State, there is a massive budget deficit. Well, they just closed it, but they had to raise $12 billion in taxes to do that. And so when those decisions get made, every industry is looked at, right? Every situation to generate revenue for, for the at least in our case, to fill those budget shortfalls gets looked at. And what I realized is being part of the Washington Mortgage Bankers Association is at least we are a sounding board for the local legislature to reach out to and say, hey, we're considering making this change. And I'll give you an example. One just recently was a change to allow homeowners to put a lock on their title, kind of like you would think of like a credit report. You can like put a lock on your credit report, which can be kind of difficult when you go to pull someone's credit and they have a lock on it and they got to take the lock off. And they wanted to allow homeowners to do that as well, which sounds like a great idea. There's a lot of fraud apparently about people like stealing people's property through identity, theft and whatnot. So the concept sounded good, but the implementation of the idea would have been catastrophic for the mortgage and real estate industry, really the real estate industry, but also for sellers, potentially buyers, the timing of transactions. And it's not that it was a bad idea. It's that had it been implemented by the legislature without input from the industry, it could have been an absolute mess and really made it difficult to have smooth closings of transactions. So that one ended up being not even pushed through this legislative session, but we got to give input on, okay, not a bad idea, but here's the things you maybe didn't think about that could be impacted by this. We give our input, and I'm sure at some point this thing comes back around. It very well may become something that we adopt here in Washington State, but it would have been done with the advocacy and input from the industry to make sure it didn't negatively impact home buyers or sellers in a way that was unintended. That's just one example, and the list goes on. Some of it has to do with taxes directly, things that are taxed in our industry. In our state in particular, we have a B&O tax, which is kind of unique in Washington State. So we tax revenue. And so mortgage companies, and especially in smaller regional banks, some are exempt from having to pay those taxes, because when those taxes get levied, they do typically just get pushed right directly on to the buyer, and that's not unintended. And these are mostly pass-through fees that are really third-party fees, but we're being taxed on them. So it's just having the opportunity to share the why behind what we do. And if you made a change like that, we understand why you would want to make that, but here's the unintended potential consequences of doing that to first-time home buyers, to even our local banks, which are, I think as the state legislature, they care about the business thriving. We try to focus most of our advocacy around how it impacts consumers and, their constituents, their local home buyers directly. But sometimes these things have big impacts on our businesses as well. And we want to be able to share what those impacts are, because sometimes those have to then trickle down to the consumer, right? And we want them to understand the impact of that. So that's just a little bit about it. For me, you know what it was, Kristin? It was proximity. It was going to the Hill. It was going to the National Advocacy Conference a couple times, meeting with legislators that opened my eyes as to the real influence that even as a loan officer you can have on policy and ideas and decisions that are made. I think what people forget is that a lot of and this is maybe more so on the state and local level, but these are business people. These are people that work other jobs. These are not full-time necessarily lawmakers, and they don't know anything about our industry. They may have a completely different education and background, and they really do need input from as many people as possible to help make the right decisions, because otherwise they're left to that one or two or three people that said, hey, let's fix this thing that's going on, or that we think needs fixed. Let's draft a bill. They don't know anything about our industry. That bill goes into a committee. The committee says, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Let's adopt that. But before we do that, let's get some feedback. And if no one gives feedback, it might just go right through. And you're like, wait, what? That was the dumbest thing. Why'd you do that? And it's like, well, you didn't reach out and give any advocacy on behalf of your industry or the clients impacted by this. So how would we know? And they just don't know. So I don't blame them directly. I blame us as an industry for not taking it seriously, because I think a lot of people believe their voice doesn't matter. And what I realized by being in close proximity is that one conversation with a legislature, and they're like, I had no idea. You just told me something I had no idea about. And you're like, really? I'm just a loan officer who doesn't really know that much at the end of the day. And they're like, yeah, but it's more than they know, and that's not demeaning towards them. Like, how would they know?
Yeah.
Like, they don't know our industry. So anyway, I could go on all day, but that's where my passion came from, was being around it, seeing it, and seeing the impact we could have on on the people making these decisions.
Yeah, the majority of the loan officers coming with us for advocacy for the conference is they've never been to this. They feel, pretty nervous about it. And I'm like, you just talk about some stories from, your experience, and it is really valuable. And I think, like you said, people underrate the value of their voice in that position. And so I'm super excited to create more space for them to have a voice at the table. And then also, the other thing I was going to say is that back to the trust issue, if their market sees them on the Hill advocating for their rights, and for their consumers, that builds trust. So there's a huge opportunity there to also showcase, like, hey, I'm involved in advocacy. I care about my market. If you're involved in education and advocacy, you're going to show up really well in your market.